I'm Eliza Thompson, 29 years old, and the day I woke up from a coma. I found out my parents had already tried to claim my inheritance and told the doctors to let me die. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect family. A white colonial house in Portland, Oregon, with navy shutters and a red front door, Christmas cards with matching sweaters, Sunday brunches with crepes and orange juice, and in every photo frame lining the mantel, a tall father, a graceful mother, a laughing little blonde named Cassie, and me, standing slightly off-center, always just a bit out of place. I was the quiet one, the one who never made a fuss. I picked up toys before being asked, said thank you too often, and smiled even when I wanted to cry. When Cassie knocked over the flower vase during a game of tag, I said I did it. My mother looked at me and said, "Eliza's always such a responsible girl." Then she turned to Cassie and added, "You've got so much spirit, darling." Spirit. That was their favorite word for Cassie. When she refused to eat broccoli, it was independence. When she yelled at waiters, it was assertiveness. I was disciplined, helpful, reliable. No one cheered when I brought home straight A's. But when Cassie passed math with a C+, they bought her cupcakes. The unfairness didn't come all at once. It dripped in slowly, like a faucet with a leak you can't quite prove. Cassie got the bigger bedroom. Cassie picked where we went on vacations. Her artwork stayed on the fridge for months. Mine disappeared quietly into drawers. I never said anything. Not because I didn't notice, but because I thought if I kept doing everything right, maybe they'd see me. Not as Cassie's opposite, but as their daughter. One night when I was 12, I got up to get water and heard their voices from the kitchen, low and sharp. "You've always favored Cassie," my mother hissed. "It's not favoritism," my father snapped. "It's just Rebecca's not really ours. You know that." I dropped the glass. Silence. I ran back to my room before they could see me. My heart was pounding, the truth echoing louder than the shatter of glass. Not really ours. The next morning, I sat at the breakfast table, waiting for them to say something, to acknowledge what I'd heard, maybe even to apologize. But nothing came. Finally, I whispered, "I know I'm adopted." My mother smiled, tight and rehearsed. "You must have been dreaming, sweetheart." And just like that, the moment passed. They lied calmly, easily, as if truth were something you could erase with toast and coffee. That was the day I stopped asking to be loved the way Cassie was. Instead, I became excellent. If I couldn't belong by birth, maybe I could earn my place by being impossible to ignore. It would take me years to understand perfection is the loneliest prison, and I had built mine brick by careful brick. Perfection, it turned out, earned me awards, but not affection. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full ride to Stanford, and by 22, I'd co-founded a medical tech startup specializing in AI diagnostics. The local paper ran a feature on our company's seed round. My parents framed it, cutting out the part where I credited my team and hung it next to Cassie's third-grade soccer photo. At public events, they beamed with pride, shaking hands like seasoned campaigners. "Eliza's done such wonderful things," my mother would say, her voice heavy with ownership but light on warmth. "We always knew she was destined for something big," my father added, though he'd never once asked what I actually did. The only person who ever really saw me, was my grandmother. Sylvia. Grandma Sylvia lived in a vine-covered brick house just off Hawthorne Street, with lace curtains, mismatched teacups, and books stacked in every corner like they were keeping the walls upright. She smelled like lilac and always had a candle burning that reminded me of cinnamon and old paper. Beginning at age 13, I spent every summer with her. At first, it was just a break from home. Later, it became a lifeline. "You don't fidget like Margaret," she told me once, handing me a cup of tea. "And your eyes? Your mother's were green too." I didn't ask which mother she meant. I didn't have to. When I finally broached the subject at 17, she looked over her glasses and said, "One day, sweetheart, When the time is right, that was her refrain. After graduation, after the company launches, after you're ready. But after never came. With my parents, questions were punished with silence or deflection. Why does Cassie have Dad's old keepsakes and not me? I asked once after finding a box labeled "For Cassie" in the attic. My father didn't even look up from his laptop. She's sentimental, he said. You should be grateful, my mother added, wiping down the kitchen counter. We've given you everything. It always came back to that how much I had, not how much I meant. To ask for emotional honesty was seen as betrayal. Stop dredging up drama, they'd say. Focus on your future. So I built my future. Every rejection hardened into ambition. Every cold shoulder became a stepping stone, and every unanswered question became fuel. By 25, I was leading investor meetings in San Francisco, flying coast to pitch hospitals, building something real and valuable. And yet, even then, I caught myself wondering if I cured cancer. Would they finally look at me with something like "Love, Cassie"? Meanwhile, had become a surgical resident following in our father's footsteps, at least genetically. They had a language I didn't speak, stories about anatomy labs and med school pranks, memories I wasn't a part of. At dinners, I nodded and smiled, always the outsider looking in. Still, I kept coming home for holidays, mostly for Sylvia. It was at one such Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, that everything cracked wide open. Dinner was its usual formal affair, turkey carved with surgical precision, cranberry sauce spooned in symmetrical spirals. Grandma Sylvia was quieter than usual, but her eyes sparkled when I told her about a new diagnostic model our team was testing. I always knew you'd build something that mattered, she said, resting her hand over mine. Yes. Well, my mother interrupted, pouring more wine. Eliza always did try very hard to prove herself. I stiffened. Prove myself, I asked. It's nothing personal, my father added, swirling his glass. A lot of adopted children go through that phase. The word hit like ice water. Cassie looked up from her plate, fork halfway to her mouth. Wait, adopted? Oh, she knows, my mother said, waving her hand dismissively. She's known since she was 12. You denied it, I said, my voice shaking. You gaslit me. Every time I asked, you told me I was imagining things. We thought it was better that way, my father replied calmly, like he was explaining a minor clerical decision. Children need stability. I needed the truth, I said. My mother set down her wine. We gave you everything: education, a home, opportunities. Most adopted kids would be grateful. Sylvia's hand slammed against the table, silverware rattling. That's enough, Margaret, but it wasn't. Not for me. 20 years, I whispered. 20 years of chasing love that should have been unconditional. You didn't want me. You wanted a trophy, a project, a prop. Cassie stared at them, at me, then at her empty plate like it might offer clarity. I stood. My napkin dropped to the floor. I'm done earning love I should have had for free. Then I left. I changed my number, moved apartments, cut them off. Only Sylvia stayed in my life quietly, without question. She never explained further, but she never denied anything either. They love you in their way. She once said, "Love shouldn't feel like an interview." I replied. She died 6 months later, in her sleep, while I was out of town on business. They didn't call me. I found out through her lawyer. She left me everything. And still, I didn't know the whole truth. Not yet. But the time was coming, and so was the reckoning. The letter from Sylvia's lawyer arrived 2 days after her funeral. I hadn't even known she was gone. My parents didn't bother to call. Her house, her books, her memories, all of it now mine. But grief doesn't settle easily when it's mixed with betrayal. I told myself I would deal with the estate later. First, I needed to breathe. The crash happened on a Tuesday. It had been raining that soft, whispering kind of Portland rain, the kind that seeps into your bones. I was at the office late, tweaking code for our latest diagnostic update. Naomi, my business partner, told me to call it a night. "You'll be sharper with rest," she said. But I've never been good at unfinished things. By the time I left, it was nearly 10 p.m. The city was slick with reflection, streetlights turning puddles into fractured gold. My apartment was only 15 minutes away. I figured I'd be fine. I don't remember the impact, only the sensation. A blinding light, metal folding inward, the weightlessness of spinning. I learned later that my car had flipped twice before slamming into a utility pole. The airbag saved my life. Barely. 3 broken ribs, a shattered collarbone, a traumatic brain injury. I was unconscious before the ambulance arrived. I don't remember the sirens or the ER, but I remember the voices. Not at first, but later, in fragments. "She's in critical condition," a doctor said. "Severe cranial trauma. We've induced a coma to reduce swelling." Next of kin, another voice asked. She listed Margaret and Charles Thompson as emergency contacts. I remember the cold in their voices, professional, detached, then familiar tones. My father's, "What exactly are you doing for her now?" My mother's surgery. "And how much will that cost?" A pause. Then the doctor again. "We'll need authorization for the procedure." My mother lowered her voice. "There's been a misunderstanding. Eliza isn't actually our daughter. I'm sorry she was adopted. Informally. No paperwork was ever finalized." Another long pause. The doctor's tone shifted. Cooler now. "Regardless, you're listed as her emergency contacts. She's your legal responsibility unless proven otherwise." "You're not listening," my father interrupted. "We owe her nothing. We're not authorizing anything." And then, silence. I tried to move, to scream, to open my eyes, anything but my body was a cage. My mind screamed inside a broken shell. I don't know how long they stood there, but eventually I heard the door open, then close. They left. They walked away while I lay broken and barely breathing. The next voice I heard was soft, firm, steady. "I've never seen anything like it," a nurse said. "Their own daughter. Check her phone for other contacts," the doctor muttered. The nurse's name was Emily Davis. She became my anchor in the void. Her voice read charts, played music, told me about the weather. Sometimes she whispered encouragement while changing bandages. Sometimes she just sat near, so I wouldn't be alone. I don't care what her parents say. She told someone once, "She's a person. She matters." 3 days later, they found Naomi. She flew in immediately, signed all the necessary forms, and paid for the surgery my parents refused. She called our lawyer. She contacted my doctors daily, and every night, she sat beside me, holding my hand like she could will me back to life. The surgery took place on day 5. When I finally opened my eyes in recovery, Emily's voice was the first thing I heard clearly. "You're okay," she whispered. "You made it, Eliza." But I wasn't okay. Not yet. My body ached with every movement. Sitting up was agony. Walking even 2 steps felt like climbing Everest. But nothing hurt like what I remembered. Not the crash, not the coma, not the stitches. What cut deepest was the truth they had left me. Not emotionally, not metaphorically, but literally. Left me to die in a hospital bed, like I was nothing. When Naomi finally told me everything about the recording Emily made, about the legal steps already in motion, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I simply nodded and whispered, "We fight." The woman I was before the crash had wanted their love. The woman I became in that bed, broken but breathing, wanted only justice. Justice, however, is rarely swift. It requires clarity, strength, and the ability to face your own pain without flinching. As my body healed slow, aching inch by inch, my mind began stitching itself back together too. I wasn't just recovering from an accident. I was crawling out of a lifetime of silence, Emily brought warmth to the cold corridors of my hospital stay. She talked to me like I was fully there, even when I could only respond with the faintest nod. Naomi became my shield handling lawyers, fielding press inquiries, ensuring my company remained stable. Together, they built a world where I could begin again. But grief has a way of sneaking past your defenses. One rainy afternoon, Naomi sat beside me and quietly said, "There's something you should know. Your grandmother passed while you were in the coma." The news didn't land all at once. It settled on my chest like wet wool. Sylvia had been the only one who made me feel like I belonged not because of blood, but because of belief. "She left something for you," Naomi added, handing me a thick envelope. "Her lawyer's been trying to reach you." It sat unopened on my bedside table for hours. When the hallway finally quieted and the morphine drip dulled into a soft hum, I broke the seal. Inside a letter in Sylvia's unmistakable script and a stack of official documents. "My dearest Eliza, it began, if you're reading this, then I've failed to keep my promise to tell you in person. Forgive an old woman's cowardice. Some truths are easier written than spoken." She told me everything. My birth mother was Caroline Sylvia's niece, just 18 and scared. My father, her high school boyfriend, had vanished at the first mention of pregnancy. Sylvia, hoping to keep me within the family, had offered me to her son and his wife, Charles and Margaret Thompson, who were then struggling with infertility. What Sylvia didn't know, and what would change the course of my life, was that Margaret became pregnant with Cassie just weeks after they brought me home. 2 babies, one loved, one tolerated. I confronted them many times. Sylvia wrote, "Charles always promised to do better, but promises mean little without action. Still, I stayed silent longer than I should have. I thought keeping the family together mattered most. I see now I was wrong. The documents confirmed what my parents had denied in that hospital room. My adoption had been legal, finalized. I was their daughter in every way that mattered, at least on paper. I've left everything to you," Sylvia concluded. "Not out of guilt, but because you are my family. You always were. I loved you from the moment I held you in my arms, and I never stopped. I cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since the accident. Not for the betrayal this time, but for the love I'd lost. A love I hadn't realized was holding me together until it was gone." The next morning, I called James Archer, Sylvia's attorney. We spoke for nearly an hour. He confirmed the estate was now frozen due to my parents filing a conservatorship claim, arguing I was mentally unfit due to the accident. "They filed the motion 3 days after the crash," he said, not bothering to hide his disgust. "They're moving quickly." "So will we," I replied. We built our strategy piece by piece. I requested copies of all medical records and security footage from the hospital. Emily provided a statement. Naomi compiled evidence of my mental competency emails, messages, even meeting notes from the early days of my recovery. Then I called a home security firm and had Sylvia's house locked down. New cameras, new locks, full monitoring. I wasn't going to let them walk in like it was theirs. But the most important piece was still unwritten. The letter. I started it a dozen times. Some drafts were boiling with rage, others too clinical. Nothing felt right. It wasn't until a late-night session with my trauma therapist that I finally understood what it needed to be. "What do you want from them?" she asked. "An apology," I said. "But I know I'll never get it." "Then what's left?" "Freedom," I said. So I wrote, carefully, clearly. Without screaming, I told them I knew the truth. About the hospital, about the lie of my adoption, about their betrayal. I included a USB with the security footage. I attached legal documentation proving they had no claim neither to the estate nor to me. But more than that, I let them go. "I release you," I wrote, "from any obligation to me. And I release myself from any hope of your love. I no longer need your recognition to be whole. I am enough." I sealed the letter in a new envelope. On the front, I wrote in Sylvia's script copied from an old birthday card to ensure they'd open it. Then I gave it to James. When the time comes, I told him, leave this on the table. The war wasn't over. But the lines were drawn. I had my truth. I had my proof. And for the first time in my life, I had the final word. The letter was no longer mine. It belonged to the moment. James delivered it to the old dining room table, beneath the stained glass window where sunlight used to land on Sylvia's silverware. Every corner of that house still smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books, as if she were just in the next room. But this time, the visitors were not welcome. At precisely 2:03 p.m. on Saturday, my parents' silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Naomi and I were at her apartment, the live stream from the house's security system open on my laptop. We watched as my father stepped out first, checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. My mother followed. Her smile taut and polished her fundraiser face. I used to call it, Cassie came last, lingering behind them, hands shoved in her coat pockets, eyes unreadable. They tried the front door. It's not working, my father muttered, rattling the handle. Did you try the back? My mother asked. I shouldn't have to try the back. This is my mother's house. Was her house, Cassie corrected quietly. My father scowled. When a locksmith arrived 10 minutes later, hired by them under the pretense of retrieving family mementos, I watched him open the door and leave, unaware of the storm he'd just ushered in. Once inside, my mother went straight for the crystal collection in the front cabinet. This would look perfect in our foyer, she mused, running her fingers along a vase Sylvia had once said she wanted buried with her. We're here for Dad's keepsakes, Cassie reminded her. Don't be naive, my mother snapped. Eliza isn't going to recover enough to claim anything. The court will give guardianship to us. This is ours eventually. Cassie fell silent. In the hallway, my father emerged from the staircase. The silver's still in the master. Nothing's touched. Has anyone actually seen her? Cassie asked hesitantly. Visited my parents, exchanged a glance. The hospital staff were uncooperative, my mother said flatly. Besides, you know how Eliza is. So independent. Too independent. My father muttered. If she'd just listened to me about that route. Are you blaming her for getting hit by a drunk driver? Cassie's voice rose, incredulous. Of course not, my mother said smoothly. We're all just stressed. They moved into the dining room. The envelope was waiting. What's this? My father asked, lifting it. My name was written across the front in Sylvia's elegant hand. It's addressed to Eliza. Cassie said. Well, she's not here. My mother snatched it and tore it open. As she read, her color drained. The fake composure dissolved. Her hands trembled. What is it? My father demanded. She couldn't answer. She handed it to him instead. His jaw clenched tighter with each page. This is slander, he spat finally. Lies. Manipulations. Cassie reached for the letter. My father held it away. Family business, he said. I am family, Cassie replied, grabbing it from him. She read in silence, her eyes growing wider with every paragraph. It says you left her, she whispered. Told the doctors she wasn't your real daughter. My mother collapsed into a chair. It wasn't like that. We were in shock. The doctors. It says you told them not to treat her, Cassie interrupted. That you said you owed her nothing. That's taken out of context. My father insisted. We explained the adoption was complicated. There's a link to video footage, Cassie said, already pulling out her phone. The next few minutes were nearly silent, only the tinny audio of their voices filling the room. She's not our real daughter. We owe her nothing. Don't treat her. When the clip ended, Cassie stared at them. You left her to die, she said, barely more than a whisper. Your own daughter. She's not my mother started, then stopped. Not what Cassie's voice cracked. Not your daughter. Because according to these documents, She is. You adopted her. Legally, you raised her. You let her believe you don't understand the complexities. My father began. I understand more than enough. Cassie cut him off. You never saw her as yours. That's why you always made her work harder for half the love. My mother straightened. We gave her everything: education, opportunity. Except love, Cassie said. From Naomi's apartment, I watched the shift in her face, realization followed by grief, then anger, all the missed birthdays, the ignored accomplishments, the way I was always on the sidelines. It finally made sense to her. I can't be here, Cassie said, standing abruptly. She gathered the letter and its attachments. I need to think. Cassie, don't call me. When she left, my parents stood frozen in the room they once used to host holidays. Now it held only their disgrace. Well, my father said bitterly, look what she's done. Turned Cassie against us too. She was always good at manipulation. My mother muttered. They argued, scrambled, tried to think of ways to contain the damage. But there was no spinning the truth. I closed the laptop. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the hollow ache of wanting their approval. All I felt was peace. Cassie's footsteps had barely faded down the driveway when I knew the storm was finally over. Not because my parents understood, or apologized, or changed, because they never would, but because their power to hurt me had ended. It had died the moment the truth was spoken aloud and echoed back, not in silence, but in solidarity. The next day, Cassie texted, "Can we talk? Just us." I stared at the message longer than I expected to. Then I typed, "Tomorrow, 10 cafe on Alder Street." We sat across from each other, steam rising from untouched mugs. Her eyes flicked to the scar above my brow, to the cane resting against my chair. I could see the guilt etched into the slump of her shoulders. I didn't know. She said quietly, "About the hospital, about any of it. I believe you." I answered. And I did. She reached for my hand across the table. I let her for a moment, then pulled gently away. "It's not about whether you knew." I said, "It's about what you do now." Over the weeks that followed, Cassie kept showing up, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to help with estate logistics. Slowly, deliberately, we built a relationship not out of shared blood, but shared truth. She never asked for quick forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. But she stood with me. That was enough. I poured my inheritance, not just the money, but the story, into something that might matter. Naomi and I launched Thalys, a communication system for brain trauma patients like me, those trapped between consciousness and silence. Inspired by the void I had floated in, and the lifeline Emily had become, it translated eye movement and neural signals into basic expression. Most patients never get to say, "Don't give up on me," I told Naomi during our product presentation. Now they can. The day we reached our first beta test, I lit a cinnamon candle in Sylvia's old office. She would have approved. Meanwhile, my parents filed a final act of retaliation, a lawsuit claiming emotional distress. They said the footage had ruined their reputation and caused irreparable psychological harm. Their lawyer painted me as a manipulative, bitter child seeking revenge. The judge dismissed the case in less than 10 minutes. Documented truth is not defamation, he ruled, nor can abandonment be reframed as injury. The verdict made the local paper. Colleagues, neighbors, even former friends stopped returning their calls. They left Oregon a month later. I didn't notice until Cassie told me. "Are you okay?" she asked, folding laundry at my kitchen island. I thought for a moment, then said, "Yes. They've been gone for a long time. The mailing address just caught up. 1 year after the accident, I hosted a dinner at the house. My house. Naomi came with her partner. Emily brought her wife. James arrived with a bottle of aged scotch and a quiet pride in his eyes. Cassie, newly relocated to the East Wing, invited a kind-eyed neurosurgeon from the hospital. The table was full, and for the first time in my life, so was I. When dessert arrived, I stood with a glass in hand. To family, I said, my voice clear. Not by blood, not by law, but by choice, and by showing up when it counts. They echoed the words, glasses raised, to family. Later that night, Cassie joined me on the porch swing. She hesitated before sitting, as if asking without words. I nodded. Do you ever wonder where they are now? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted. But it doesn't hurt anymore. How did you stop it? I watched the shadows flicker through the glass lantern above us, then said, I stopped waiting for them to be someone they're not. And I started being someone I didn't need to explain. Cassie nodded slowly, her hands folded in her lap. I'm still learning how to do that, she whispered. I know, I said gently. You're not alone. We sat in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. In the distance, a dog barked. Somewhere far off, a car passed. But inside that stillness, something had shifted. Not erased, just realigned. I used to think love was something you earned by being perfect, by staying silent, by never asking for too much. I know better now. My worth was never theirs to give. I owe them nothing. Not my peace, not my future, not the soft, beating center of who I am. What they didn't give, I built. What they couldn't see, I lived. And what they tried to discard, I have claimed fully without apology. As I stood, the porch creaked beneath my feet. I turned back toward the house, warm light through old windows, voices drifting from the kitchen, laughter that sounded like it belonged. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. Because dignity cannot be taken, only reclaimed, and true worth never needs permission to exist.